Hello everyone, this is the second part of this lecture series. This is going to focus on Lacan in conversation with Krishnamurti. And the previous part was about phenomenology to Lacan, and now I want to twist it a little bit. So if we take the framework that we had before, it looked like this. So the cycle of life, we have the morning, we have the forenoon, we have the midday, and the afternoon, evening. And then you have a break from the one into multiplicity. You have some type of enforcement of a symbolic stability in language. And then you have this uneasy feeling, this that something is out of joint with the symbolic system, right? And then you have this, either you have this symbolic disintegration, or you're involved in a bad infinity. And then what we're going to talk about today is this, what is a frameless frame of an empty subject? What do I mean when I say that? Disengaged from one's fantasy constellation. So this is what we want to talk about today, the relationship between Lacan and Krishnamurti. So this was where we ended last time, symptom as symptom. And I just want to give a summary of the topics we covered the last time. And it's something like this, that through the Lacanian triad, we gain access to the registers of the psyche. So imaginary, symbolic, real. And then we want to place the subject into language. So the signifier has to act on history, and the quilting points lock into place the signifying chain, become part of a structured network of meaning, right? So, and in the end, this is pure, like a meaningless signifier, which creates the subject's own fantasy constellation, or you might say reality, which is initially fixed by the big other. Okay. So then, the real is this gap between being and language, words, image, thought abstraction, and the impossibility of closing that gap within those coordinates, right? So this leads to this bad infinity on the first level of negation, which would be this alienation. You have an alienation, but maybe you don't get to the second step, and then you loop around the symptom, as in what your desire. So this bad infinity is the inability to reconcile that the content of that fantasy constellation is not fixed, right? It's dynamic to mask the real of your desire. And then we reach symptom, which unmask, right, this fantasy screen. And then we reach a position where contradiction is an internal condition of every identity. And that's where we left the previous time, with that imposition, right? Because we're still thinking in terms of words, images, thought abstractions, and that creates this contradiction. So Can we do something about that? Well, I'll try. So if we think about the previous structures like this, you have like a static system, right? A symbolic. I mean, it's not static, but let's say insufficient, impotent. And then we have Lacan's system, which is imaginary symbolic, opposed to the real, but it's this inherent dynamic between them. And then we have the third step, or the third system, which for me is an empty system. So in Synthome here, our language tool breaks down, right? And for me, this is when, if we still are in language here, then the desire becomes the drive. And then to reach this empty category, this empty system, you have to exit language within the subjective position. So, so how do you go about doing that? How is that even a thing, right? So from static to dynamic to empty. Okay. So this is Krishnamurti. And essentially he thought that a revolution of the psyche cannot come from an external source, be it religious, political, or social entity. And I think he's correct. But I think also that you can lower that threshold to take that step. So let's read there. It's two passages from just his meditations. Listen with a calm mind, an empty mind. Listen with ease, without strain, and you will find an extraordinary change taking place within you. A change comes which comes without your volition, without your asking. And in that change there is great beauty and depth of insight. How do you listen? Do you listen with your projections, through your projection, through your ambition, desires, fears, anxieties, through hearing only what you want to hear, only what will be satisfactory, what will gratify, what will give comfort, what will for the moment alleviate your suffering? If you listen through the screen of your desires, then you obviously listen to your own voice. You are listening to your own desires. And is there another form of listening? Is it not important to find out how to listen, not only to what's being said, but to everything? Listening has importance only when one is not projecting one's own desires through which one listens. Can one put aside all these screens through which we listen and really listen? So for me, if we start with the first passage here, listen with a calm mind, an empty mind. That means that there is no interpretive structure for me. And then if you take the second passage, if you listen through the screens of your desire, that's when you're still in bad infinity. You're only listening to your own voice, your own desires. So past that would be Synthome. But then you're still in language, which doesn't make your mind calm and empty. So if we think about it like this, here you have an image which would be like the screens of desire, right? And then the right image is when you're alleviated of those screens of desires. So you go from a symbolic conditioning to the frameless frame of an empty subject, alleviated from those screens of desire and knowledge, of tradition, religions, and institutions. So here I like the analogy that Ian McGillis has. He says that the left hemisphere is like a room of mirrors. So you're always reflecting back at yourself, right? We're very familiar with these echo chamber analogies, right? If you think about that, but for yourself, right? You're always reflecting back on your own interpretations, desires, categories. So let's say, because you want to be right, you really want that static system to function, because then you don't have to rebuild it or reconfigure it. So here I playfully like to call this the mirror room, because in Lacan he has the ego formation, which is the mirror stage. But then let's say that would be imaginary, right? The imaginary ego, which is filled by the crystallized desire of the other. But then let's say when you have that one mirror, so let's say this is that mirror, right? But then the rest is filled up by the symbolic. So the mirror stage, right? The mirror then becomes the mirror room. And that is the screens of your desires. Um, so your mind is calm, empty, open, without any knowledge of the past or ideals of the future. There is no division, no divided subject, just a truly empty subject. And if you have this symbolic conditioning, let's say, and a cluttered mind of desire, and you go to this formless form of an empty subject, then there is still those coordinates, right? The crystallized desire of the other, because there is always a minimal, a minimal symbolic interaction there. So let's say I drew that diamond because I think it's similar to Sims. That's a that's a good analogy, because when you walk around, right, it's like you have the coordinates above you or attached to you. So, or you have those symbolic objective coordinates pointing to you, like the signifier Shane is pointing to a signified. Those are at the same time pointing at you, but not maybe the symbolic meaning of you, but not the totality, right? So here we come again to this empty form. With the very utterance of the word "I am happy," the experience of happiness is shattered. Thus, in enjoyment, there is no enjoyer. There can be no greater renunciation than the removal of the very entity that calls itself the renouncer. It is only when the enjoyer is absent that intense experience of enjoyment is possible. So think about this. When you're happy, are you aware that you're happy? Because for me, uh, when you're in experience, when you're in that, there is no movement of thought that has to say, I'm happy, right? And we kind of get to that in this next passage where he says that the word is not a thing. And this means that the word, the image you use, the thought abstraction that you come up with is not the thing, right? It's not the largest frame is the empty frame, right? So if you have a system, you can have a subsystem and a sub-subsystem. So for instance, that would be science. You take a system, you take a small part of that, you investigate that. So in order to interact with being in any in any useful manner, you have to do that differentiation. And I think it's necessary to do that. But at the same time, you have to think that it's not whatever thought conjures up in terms of words, images, that's not it, right? So watch without any movement of thought. The thought is the image, the word. There is this quality of mind free from the me, and therefore no separation. Not that we are one, but that we discover the unity as a living thing, not a conceptual thing, when there is a sense of choiceless attention. So here I want to approach this topic of attention as well. So choiceless attention means that you're not directing the attention anywhere. Because let's say I want to focus on this thing. I want to attend to it, right? Then I would separate things which I attend to, let's say attention and inattention. And then everything which is not in that category would be inattention. And then that causes a division between those two. And then you're not empty because there is a division between what you attend to and what you don't attend to. So in this sense, choiceless attention is to attend without that dynamic. So he talks a lot about division. So this would be dependence on authority, modifications to things as they are, ideology, dogmas, and groups, communities. So I think all of this is either an external or an internal division. So if you think about it, if you want to improve at something, isn't the part of you that wants to improve the same part that needs improvement? And then that would create an internal division. And then you're not empty, right? Because there's still the internal division. And what is freedom from the known, if not radical openness to being? So this is kind of how I think about division. So Alan Watts said this once. I think it's a very nice sentence. When two Zen masters meet, they only smile because they have nothing to say to each other. So this would be the distinction between word, image, thought, and being. And I think about it like this, that if you're stuck in the past, let's say, with your thought, you have a very low energy and you're divided. So first of all, you're not even focusing on a future, you're focusing on the past. And it creates a division because the state that you're in now isn't the state you were in before. and the focus is backwards. So it's negative. But at the same time, as you can be focused on past events, even future events are an hindrance in this regard, because, as I said before, the ideal or the goal that you strive from creates a division between who you are in the present. So even if it's higher energy to focus on the future, it still creates an internal division. And here I think that perhaps low energy is external, or the past relationship to the past is external, and the future is internal. But I feel like if you're in the present, you have a very high energy, because, well, well, you're not internally divided, right? And the moment I thought about that, it made a lot of sense, because imagine the energy that you spend thinking about the future and the past. Imagine the built-up tension in you because of all of those divisions, right? Think about it. And this is how I think about, so let's say you're low energy, past. Then I feel like this would be like a Rogerian behavioralist approach. This would just be a reintegration into the symbolic order, because you're at the stage where you probably just need a push in the right direction to become reintegrated. So before you can approach something different, you just have to have the base level, right? And I think this is something like what Peterson is talking about when he says you need something to strive for and something to run away from. So then let's say if you take this image, you have this dual tension between low energy past division and medium energy future division. But I would still say that the highest level of energy comes from no internal divisions, which means that you're empty subject in the present. So um, the importance of release from entrapment in the network of thought through a perceptual process of attention, observation, or choiceless awareness, which would release the true perception of reality without mediation of any authority or guru. So what he says here is that this empty, calm mind is not a process. It's not something that's external to you, which can be given to you, but it's a step. It's not a process, it's a step. And I agree here that it is like it's a 1 or 0. It's a step. It's a transition. It's not a process. But I want to disagree with that. It's such a hard conditioning, these screens of desire, of to engage with on your own, right? So this is why I think that you need to adhere to some symbolic structure system to constrain you. And then it's only when you have been constrained that you can come out of that conditioning, let's say, symbolic deconditioning. And he says that to educate the student rightly is to help him to understand the total process of himself. For it is only that there is integration of the mind and heart in everyday action, that there can be intelligence and inward transformation. So this would be the same as previous. It's not an external, it's not something externally imposed on you. It's an internal step. But I think that step can be lowered by a process, right? That's two different things. And I don't think they disagree. So here we take two words, guru and mantra. And here guru means weight, and one who dispels illusions, and one who points. So it's not someone who points at something, right? Because then it would be external, but he points. And to dispel illusions here, I would say that relates again to perhaps the illusion of that, let's say, the big other exists, right? And then mantra, for at least for Krishnamurti, is not something that you tell yourself every day repetitively, right? Because if you repeat something day after day, your mind becomes dull with repetition. And a dull mind is not an empty mind. It's just desensitized. So it means to ponder, banish self-centeredness. This is not the same as repeating something. And in this sense, internally, right? You are the student and the teacher, and the watching is the teacher, and the learning is the student. So this would be how we go from form to formless in the subjective position, taking that step. So I would say that the truth, let's say, truth is unframed being. So it's the biggest frame because it's an empty frame. And then we have relative truth, which is static, because truth is this continuum. And if I were to draw it, I would probably draw something like this, that knowledge of the past keep you in the same lane, let's say. So that would be a partial truth. And to have an empty mind means to be not conditioned by that knowledge of the past or desires in the future. So by being empty, right, it's like you're stepping into this larger ray, let's say, where you're infinitely learning in potential. So this would be analogous with smoothly and effortlessly transitioning from different lanes within that continuum, right? So you're not thinking in terms of the words, images, thought abstractions of your knowledge, but you transition effortlessly between them all in the present. So it's infinite learning in that sense. And maybe if you want a visual comparison, it could be that you have a pointer, right, or a flashlight. It's a beam, but then you have a car light, which is like it casts the light of like 180, like this, right? 180 degrees. So it's all of that. at the same time in a relationship to that single beam, which is based on your knowledge structure. And here I wanted to bring in a bit of other Indian spirituality, which is the Upanishads. And I just wanted to relate this to Krishnamurti because he always talks about that the texts are not the step, let's say, but I feel like I said before, the threshold can be significantly lowered by that type of information. So in this sense, the words are only words before you understand. So if I take, these are some excerpts that I've picked. So truth is one, but the wise call it by many names. So partial truth, let's say. Oneness can be realized directly without mediation of rituals, religions. The Upanishads are not philosophy. They are something seen, which the student is supposed to realize. It's not something externally imposed. It's internal, right? Wake up in this state, the Upanishads say, and you will be who you truly are, free from the conditioning of the body and the mind, in a world unbounded by the limitations of time, space, and causality. So, this means for me that you're at that state, right? If you really are in the present with an empty mind, then since it's just a continuum, there is no sense of time and space. And the body become like a comfortable jacket. You wear it easily. And in meditation, you can unbound it and loosen it until you scarcely weigh at all. So here for me, meditation is not practice. It's not strict adherence to a ritual, let's say, a training, because that would dull the mind. It's just a state that you're in all the time. It's an empty state. That's the state of, let's say, being in the present. And then we have this again, that you are that, no time, space, or causality. These are forms imposed on the mind, and the mind is still. Pure consciousness, I has dissolved. There is no joy in the finite, there is only joy in the infinite. Again, if you tell yourself you're happy, are you happy? Sat Chit Ananda, absolute reality, pure awareness, unconditional joy. I feel like all of this is the same thing. It's just an empty mind state. It's saying the same thing. Words turn back frightened. I really liked that, so I had to put that in because it's like the relationship between signifier and signified again. It doesn't matter how many words you put around it. It's an internal state. So this is also two other excerpts, and then when all desires that surge in the heart are renounced, the mortal becomes immortal. When all the knots that strangle the heart are loosened, the mortal becomes immortal. This sums up the teachings of the scriptures. So, what do you think this is? It's another it's rewritten again, right? When all desires that surge in the heart are renounced, the mortal becomes immortal. When there is no focus on the future, desires of the future, right? You become empty. When all the knots that strangle the heart are loosened, the mortal becomes immortal. When all knowledge of the past is dissolved, then you become empty. This sums up the teachings of the scriptures. An empty mind, a calm mind, an empty subject. In all of this, we need to remember that the Upanishads present no system, right? Because it's just a step. When India's mystics and philosophers did build coherent structures on these foundations, they found that they produced logical disagreement. But they understood that in practice, such systems do the same thing. They simply appeal in different ways to the head and the heart. So I think that that is what Krishnamurti has said all this time, and the Upanishads as well. I don't see a contradiction between them, because they just say that it's a step. There is no system, right? But the threshold can be lowered, right? And that is that's a discussion you can have. So it appeals to you in different ways. This was the way it appealed to me, and hopefully, if you're watching this, it appeals to you in a similar way. So I would like to finish with just this one sentence, which I think is really nice. Resting in the experience of being. I think that really sums up the state, because it's calm, it's empty, it's a bit sad, and but joyful at the same time. So if we come back to this image, the cycle of life, here I want to add this in the afternoon, the frameless frame of the empty subject. And then I want to, we have this image again. Krishnamurti here, I feel like this stands in for a lot of different things. So don't focus on these thinkers necessarily. This was kind of my journey through it. And hopefully you will have some, it will be useful and interesting and, well, compelling maybe to some of you watching. And this is the framework that I've, let's say, come to go through this enforced symbolic stability, disintegration, recovery, and the frameless frame of an empty subject. So thank you very much for listening. Hopefully this information will be useful for you. This is the final image. Just you have again this pressure, this ease, and then this stillness. Yeah, I want to end on that note. Thank you very much for listening. I'm looking forward to the comments, and yeah, have a good one.